Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Self-Made on Netflix. Let's talk about it. Self-Made is a Netflix limited series that is based on the incredible life of one Madam C.J. Walker, who is this huge figure within the Black community, or even just within American history. She is such a big deal because she is, according to many, the first ever self-made female millionaire. She was this huge pioneer in business and the beauty industry, as well as being an activist and someone who was actively trying to fight the injustices and discrimination against Black people within that time in America. This was definitely a project that I was so excited about going in, especially considering that you have Octavia Spencer playing the role of Madam C.J. Walker herself, which is absolutely phenomenal. So you have this combination of the story and the talent being attached. This should be one of the best series of the entire year, easily. At least in theory. In reality, I did have a few issues with this, which we will go through, but just know that this is going to be a spoiler review of the series. And I just like to remind you before we get into the review to subscribe to my channel so you can catch new videos coming up. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. So first of all, let's go through some of the things I really enjoyed about this show. And the first thing that I would like to mention is, of course, the story itself. This story is ripe for adaptation because it is so incredible in itself. This show does a very good job of highlighting the story and bringing it to the forefront, in particular the struggles and the strife that Madam C.J. Walker had to face during this time as she was trying to build her business, as she was trying to build a name for herself. And that's another thing that the show does very well, is showing us how one would even go about building a business during this time in this political climate. And in the case of Madam C.J. Walker, it was about taking those small steps. It was about building a brand for herself, and she started off with a story and a character that people could latch onto and relate to, and that was really able to drive her sales and really able to create a community of Black women who really related to her and really felt downtrodden in their society as well, and they came to her salon as a sort of reprieve, as a sort of haven for them. And then of course, when business was booming, she was able to expand and create a factory for herself and run a company of all of these different sales people, as well as production and manufacturing, and it was just such an achievement for her because she could see her business growing right before her eyes and see the impact that it was having in her community. So from this show, not only do we get an insight into how a business would even be run in the early 20th century, but we also get it from the perspective of a woman who was so down on her luck. She was really at rock bottom at the beginning of this story, but she managed to pick herself up because she believed in this dream, this vision that she had for her future, and we're able to follow her in this very compelling journey that is of course colored by the discrimination and the racism that she had to face. But then the show goes one step further and adds another layer of complexity to it, where at the very end she becomes wealthy, she's achieved her goal, but now people are facing against her because they feel like their rights are being taken away within her company. They feel like their jobs are being threatened. So now she's dealing with the tables being turned, where she is the wealthy one and people are seeing her as the oppressor in some sense, not in the racial sense but in the economic sense, and the people who are working under her, the people on the ground level, are fighting for their own rights. And speaking of layers of complexity, another layer that this show adds and isn't afraid to explore is the idea that not only does Madam C.J. Walker have to face racism, but she also has to face sexism coming from not just outside of her race but even within the Black community itself, because she is a driven, determined and business-minded woman, which is something that is very much discouraged during this time. And so it's not enough to just face, adversity from people of other races. Now she also has to face adversity from her own race because of the fact that she is a woman and she's taking on roles that are traditionally masculine. And that's something that she constantly had to face seemingly throughout her career, not only from people on the outside, like that top business guy who was very well respected within the Black community and also kind of pro segregation. But also from her own husband. Her husband throughout a lot of the show feels very emasculated. He feels like she is taking on his role as the husband, as the head of the household, who's supposed to provide and supposed to be the breadwinner for the family. She is doing that now and showing her business-sided mind, and it's very provoking for him. And it definitely builds. I like the way that it really builds gradually throughout the show until, of course, you get to the breaking point where all hope is lost. But at the beginning, you can see he's so supportive of her and he wants her to achieve her goal. It's just that that goal keeps changing, it keeps growing, and that's what he suddenly has a problem with, is that he sees just how big her dream is, and all of a sudden he realizes that his role is no longer as significant in it. And the exploration of all of these themes just add to the level of complexity when it comes to this show. It just creates a bit more of a nuanced world, and that's not always present, by the way. The nuance is sometimes lacking, which we'll get into later on, but where it is present, it really makes the show shine, and I think it works at its best there. So we mentioned a few of the characters. Let's just go through them right now. First of all, of course, you have Octavia Spencer, who plays Madam C.J. Walker herself. She's excellent, as per usual. I mean, she's Octavia Spencer, for God's sake. But I will say that she's really able to capture the drive of this character. She is able to capture the focus, even when everyone is a naysayer and everyone is telling her this is going to be impossible. No one can doubt the look of determination on Octavia Spencer's face when she's acting the hell out of this performance. So I think she was a great choice for this character, because she was really able to portray her with a real sense of strength and a real sense of determination that I think really elevates the performance, really elevates the character in this series. I also really enjoyed Kevin Carroll's performance in this series. He plays the original C.J. Walker, Madam C.J. Walker's husband, and he's so convincing as this charming, lovable, just so endearing and romantic husband at the beginning of the show, who is so supportive of his wife, and he wants her to succeed, he wants her to do well. But that's only until, like I said, the goalpost started moving, because then her dreams got bigger and bigger, and you can see that emasculation settle in, the ridicule from his friends, the indoctrination that he should be the one in charge, he should be the one that is taking care of the family, and he couldn't handle the fact that she was becoming more successful than him, and that turned into him acting out and being a horrible person, cheating on her, ridiculing her, belittling her. I think it was such a convincing portrayal of this type of character. I'm not sure about its historical accuracy, which we'll get into again later, but just in terms of Kevin's performance here as this character, he was able to portray both the loving, doting husband and the evil betrayer that we're supposed to root against. And then we have Blair Underwood, who portrays Ransom, and he's kind of Madam C.J. Walker's chief legal advisor slash, CFO slash pretty much like everything. He's a jack of all trades in this show. And I really enjoyed this character because he gave a different perspective. He was a different portrayal of a black man in this series. A lot of the other black men in the series were very anti-women, even though they were pro-black, but he was both pro-women, pro-black women, very much supportive of Madam C.J. Walker's vision for her company. And then of course you have that tragic development where Ransom's cousin, who was depicted at first as this kind of gangster who was very much an antagonist and very much someone that he didn't want anything to do with, he ends up dying in the hands of some very racist white people who end up lynching him because he was trying to save Ransom's son. He was trying to defend him, and then sadly he became yet another victim to that horrible practice that existed back then. And this was such a tragic, horrible event that occurred, but I felt like it was needed to really highlight what was at stake here. It was needed to really highlight the accomplishment that Madam C.J. Walker had really made in creating this company, because in the face of that happening, in the backdrop of the socio-political climate in the early 20th century, it is an even bigger achievement for Madam C.J. Walker to have been able to be so successful in her field. Outside of the story itself, there are plenty of things to praise about this series. Of course, you have excellent makeup, costuming, hair. The hairstyles in this series were fantastic, phenomenal. Of course they were. You're doing a series about Madam C.J. Walker. There is no way that you can have bad hair in front of that camera. Absolutely not. And another thing that I really enjoyed about, the sets and the costuming, the hair and everything, is that it really helped to bring this time period alive. And this is something that we don't really get to see when it comes to historical dramas, the depiction of Black communities that are really thriving and doing well financially speaking. And of course, they're still facing that discrimination and adversity, but they're creating communities, they're creating clubs to support one another. And this is something that really is highlighted in this show, which I very much appreciated. It was something very new and inspiring to me. All right, so now that we've gone through all the things that I really enjoyed about this show, let's go through some of the things that I wasn't such a huge fan of. First things first, we have Tiffany Haddish portraying Lelia, who is Madam C.J. Walker's daughter. Now, I had a few issues when it came to this character. Firstly, I think she comes across as a bit of a spoiled brat for the majority of this series. Truly, I think it becomes rather aggravating to see her complain and whinge and moan when her mother is trying to achieve greatness and all she can do is say, but this is not my dream. It just becomes so infuriating, and it makes it difficult to even relate to the character, because how can you? She's coming from a place of privilege. She's coming from a place where her mother is doing all of the work and all she has to do is sit there and inherit it. It's so frustrating to see. I also think that it doesn't help that she's older. Like, this sort of mentality in a younger person, like a teenager, is somewhat forgivable. But in the case of like this grown woman complaining about having to help her mother and having to do what her mother says in order to succeed in life in a world where, I mean, we already discussed the world that they're living in. The fact that she's older, it really just does not help. As a result, this character ends up being a baby, a spoiled brat wrapped up in the body of a grown woman. In addition to this, there is also some exploration of the idea that Lelia may have been in the LGBTQ community. She does pursue relationships with women in this show, although she is married to a man at the beginning, but she's very unhappy in that marriage. Now, I think that is very interesting if that is the case, if that was real, although there is some dispute regarding the historical accuracy of this, which again, we'll talk about. I think just in terms of the historical accuracy, it's difficult to determine how her mother would have felt about her sexuality, because we don't know. We have no idea. And considering the prejudice against Black people, against, women, let's not act like there wouldn't have been prejudice against LGBTQ people as well. And in the case of Madam C.J. Walker's perspective on her child's sexuality, let's not act like we know how she would have reacted to Lelia being a lesbian, because that is a bit of a stretch even for this show. And really, just to clarify, I don't have an issue with the exploration of Lelia's sexuality in the show. I just think that it has such little nuance in comparison to the exploration of everything else, especially in the case of her mother's reaction. It's just so difficult to believe that she would have such a 21st century, and even then, liberal 21st century approach to finding out that her daughter may never marry a man. And speaking of 21st century approaches, I will say that when it came to Tiffany Haddish's performance, she very much felt like someone who had been lifted from 2020 and dumped into the early 20th century. She didn't feel like she belonged really in that world. I feel like the other actors, like Octavia Spencer, of course, Oscar award-winning Octavia Spencer, was really able to disappear into the role and disappear into her environment in a way that Tiffany Haddish was not. Another thing that I would like to sneak into my review of this show is I wasn't a huge fan of the editing, and I wasn't a huge fan of some of the creative decisions made in this series, especially when it came to those little segments where Octavia Spencer is kind of in this boxing ring, and it's supposed to signify that she is literally fighting for her company and fighting for her future. But I don't think that was very necessary. I think it would have been better off left as a metaphor that was read between the lines, as opposed to something that was outrightly shouted at us, like, yes, she is fighting for her company, like, we get it. And I think it often interrupted the flow of these scenes and made them seem a bit more choppy. Another thing that kind of took me out of the series was the music. Now, I understand they wanted to highlight some African-American artists, which is fantastic, great, you do that. But I definitely think it would have benefited from a score to really emphasize the emotion, to really play off of what was going on screen. I sometimes felt like the music kind of took me out of the 1920s world and into the 21st century, which is not where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be over there. So at times it kind of felt like the emotional impact of a scene was kind of undermined because the music kind of took me out of it and drove me right back to the 21st century. Okay, so now let's talk about the biggest issue that I had with this series so far, and I'm going to try and explain myself in the most comprehensive way possible because this is a very touchy subject matter, and that is the implied colorism. Now, this is something that I very much became aware of throughout the series as it went along, and when I was watching it, I couldn't believe it. I was like, there's no way they didn't realize how this looks. So one of the biggest plot points of this story is the competition that exists between Madam C.J. Walker and Addie Monroe. Now, Addie Monroe is this mixed race businesswoman who was already selling products before Madam C.J. Walker even started her company. And in fact, Madam C.J. Walker wanted to work for her as a salesperson, but she was turned down rather cruelly. Now, in this story, this woman appears to be the daughter of a black slave or former slave and a white master. And in this very emotional, touching scene, which is one of the only scenes that we get where we actually get to see her humanity, she's talking to her mother, and her mother has internalized a lot of these discriminative and a lot of these misunderstandings and stereotypes surrounding lighter skinned women. And she's telling her daughter that even though she was cursed with her daughter, which is offensive, she at least thinks that she can get ahead in life because of her lighter skin. And that just goes to show people's perspective of lighter skinned women at that time and the colorism that existed within the black community. But like I said, this is one of the only moments of clarity and humanity that we actually get to see from the character of Addie Monroe. Other than that, she is a cartoon character if I ever did see one. She is a maniacal cartoon villain who has absolutely no depth, absolutely no dimension to her. She literally just serves to be Madam C.J. Walker's adversary and a cackling, evil, hand-rubbing one at that. And this is such a problem because it speaks to the depiction of lighter-skinned black women on this show. They are seen as villains. They are the bad guys from all different angles. We have Addie Monroe, who again is a cartoon villain in this show and unfortunately has no real depth and dimension to her other than in that key scene, which actually gives us some background and actually helps us understand her character a bit more, until of course she hangs up that phone and a second later she's creating this whole new maniacal plan to take down Madam C.J. Walker's empire. But all of the complexity and all of the nuance that is used to handle Madam C.J. Walker's character and the strife and the struggles that she faced in this story are completely gone. They are chucked out of the window when it comes to the character of Addie Monroe. And it's especially unfortunate and especially problematic because in the story it is revealed, one of the big plot twists here, that Madam C.J. Walker was using Addie Monroe's formula in order to create her products, or at least the first successful products that she had was based loosely on Addie Monroe's formula. So the fact that this show asks us to root for this character, even though she has this huge flaw, this huge dent in her perfect reputation, is problematic, especially when her adversary is simply trying to make a living for herself, and she was the one who had the formula in the first place. And unfortunately, during this time, getting the patent on that formula would have been impossible for her because of the color of her skin. I expected the show to really highlight that and highlight the fact that both of them had issues and flaws, but at the same time they were both trying to strive towards something bigger and greater than themselves. Instead, unfortunately, the show decides to completely throw Addie Monroe's character under the bus and hail Madam C.J. Walker as this perfect heroine, which is simply not the case. And I was already annoyed by all of that when the show ended, but then I started doing research and I actually started reading a few articles about this show and found out that the character of Addie Monroe isn't even real. She was apparently loosely based on the real life Annie Malone, who was a black female entrepreneur at the time, and she also sold hair products and was very prolific in that space. But the key thing here is that she was a black woman, meaning they created this mixed race adversary of Addie Monroe for absolutely no reason. She didn't even need to be light skinned. She could have been a dark skinned woman, but this show seems to have this implicit agenda to portray these lighter skinned women as villains. Now, I think the main reason why she was mixed race in this show was to portray this character who personified the idealized version of a woman of color, someone who was light in skin and complexion, someone who had a lot of Eurocentric features to her. Basically, as far away as you can get from actually being black, you are considered more beautiful, at least more beautiful than black women, but not as beautiful as white women, unfortunately. So I believe the character of Addie Monroe was supposed to convey all of that in just her features. But it's just unfortunate because they created a character that just had no nuance to her and was just literally designed to be a punching bag for Madam C.J. Walker. Instead of taking this opportunity to add a message about how they needed to work together in unity to fight against a common cause and how there was plenty of space for both of them to prosper. Another example of a mixed race woman who is villainized in this show is of course CJ's mistress, who, if Addie is a two-dimensional character, she is like, what is one dimension even? She is one dimensional. She has no real personality. She is an archetype. And to make things worse, not only does she come after Madam C.J. Walker's husband, but she then comes after her name. She comes after her notoriety, her empire. And that's something that, of course, we as the audience cannot stand, cannot abide. And then, of course, you have the metaphysical Walker woman, who isn't a tangible character in the series, but very much has a role to play when it comes to the perception of Black beauty at this time, because she is this personification of the idealized woman of color, someone who has a lot of Eurocentric features, someone who has a lighter complexion. And this is the type of character that CJ suggests that his wife use as a representation of her company, but she refuses because she believes that she should be the woman to represent her company. Now, I think this was a good way of using the representation of the ideal Black woman from that time, because it related to the story. It related to Madam C.J. Walker's story, as well as the branding of her company and the message that she wanted to send across, and the idea that her husband just wouldn't understand that he would still be blinded by that very narrow perception of beauty was very poignant. And at the same time, this Miss Walker didn't really exist. She was just a metaphysical character, and so we weren't pointing the finger towards any real person, but rather the idea. So all in all, when it comes to this whole point, the combination of these badly written and badly executed characters, as well as the historical inaccuracy and the fact that some of them didn't even need to be in this story, or at least didn't need to be represented as lighter skinned women and ultimately villains, this all means that instead of this series bringing home this message of empowerment and unity within the Black community and Black female community, it presents this sinister underlayer of the implicit message of colorism, which is very, very unfortunate. So overall, I really did enjoy this series. I thought the messaging here was very clear and poignant, and it was fascinating to see the journey of this woman who started out so downtrodden and so hopeless become so powerful, and how she faced discrimination from not just the white populace but also within her own community as well. I thought that was amazingly executed, but at the same time there are also issues in terms of, first of all, the portrayal of Lelia, and also the idea of colorism kind of underlining the entire messaging of this story, which is very unfortunate because it's perpetuating this separation within the Black community that doesn't need to be perpetuated, especially when it's not even historically accurate, I must reiterate. So with all of that said, I'm going to be giving Self-Made a 7 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I've told you guys what my thoughts are on Netflix's Self-Made, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the show down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.